values. On behalf of the college and our large array of co-sponsoring organizations, I want to welcome you all to this discussion of what many of us see as the most serious challenge to civilization in our time. With Pope Francis, we believe that climate change has created a global crisis of vast proportions. As a statement by 500 religious leaders and climate scientists in Massachusetts recently put it, climate change is an ecological and moral emergency that impacts all other aspects of our shared lives and requires us to work together to protect our common home. Nor is the American public unaware of this. According to Gallup, 3/4 of Americans support the government spending more money on solar and wind power and setting higher emission standards for business and industry. 2/3 support imposing mandatory controls on emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, as well as higher emission standards for automobiles. And 57% believe that environmental protection should be given priority even at the expense of economic growth. To be sure, there are differences between Democrats and Republicans on these issues. Indeed, the partisan divide is growing, with 69% of Republicans now saying they think the threat of climate change is exaggerated, as opposed to just 4% of Democrats, which may help explain why none of this year's GOP gubernatorial candidates accepted our invitation to participate in this forum. But for that very reason, it is striking the degree to which policies to deal with climate change have not been part of our electoral politics. To take just the most notable example, not a single question on climate was asked in the 3 presidential debates in 2016. The purpose of this forum is to put climate on the table for this election cycle in our state. To moderate the discussion, we are delighted to have John Dankosky, well known to most of you as a leading voice at Connecticut Public Broadcasting for these almost 30 years.
30 years, almost.
And the founding host of the award-winning news show Where We Live. For the past 2 years, John has been executive editor of the New England News Collaborative, an 8-station consortium of public media newsrooms. The primary focus of the collaborative has been how New England is dealing with climate change. So let me turn the floor over to him to explain the format and introduce the candidates.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for coming. There's air conditioning here, which I think helps. Let me just plug in my computer. And this format is a loose format. This isn't a debate. This is a forum. And so what we're going to do is have some opening statements of 2 minutes from the 4 candidates. And then after that, we're going to have a conversation. The conversation is actually going to be based on some really interesting questions that were put together for the Connecticut Voter Guide on climate change. And so there will be some questions directly from that voter guide, and there will be some of my own questions. And then the really fun part about this is you'll get to ask some of your own questions as well. You should have all got little cards that you can write down a question, and there'll be volunteers coming around to collect those throughout the course of the first 45 minutes or so of our program. So they're going to come up to me, and we're going to get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. We let the candidates know that this is going to be an open-ended conversation. My job is to make sure that everyone gets to talk, and everyone gets to answer some of these questions fully without some of the problems that we have in a formal debate where people only have 30 seconds or a minute to say something very important about, as Mark says, the biggest problem facing humanity. So let's try to give people a little bit more time for this. I want to welcome up the candidates, starting to my far left, Independent Oz Griebel. Sitting next to him is Democrat Ned Lalonde. Next to him is Democrat Joe Gannon. And directly to my left is Rod Hanscom, Libertarian. So we drew lots to start, and for the 2-minute opening statements. I believe, if I have this right, Mr. Hanscom, you won, and so you get to go first. Please, 2 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate everybody coming out here tonight and for having us. So, my name is Rod Hanscom. I'm the Libertarian candidate to be the next governor of the state of Connecticut. I'm from Stamford myself. Over the years, I've had the good fortune of being able to travel internationally quite a bit. And the reason I bring that up is because so often when you travel, it opens your eyes to what's happening, not just here in the country, but also all over the world. I use the example, 8 years ago, I was traveling in Russia in January. I was actually on the edge of Siberia with some friends of mine. And though many days were very cold, everybody was commenting how it just, from 20 years previous, it's just quite a bit warmer these days than it used to be. Before moving back to the beloved home state here in Connecticut 4 years ago, I spent some time in Seattle also. And people there would say regularly, when I was a kid growing up, it used to snow regularly out here, and now we're lucky if we see snow once every 3 years. Also, last year, did a lot of travel, spent some time in Cambodia, and some locals were telling me, when I was a kid growing up, we had to wear coats periodically. You could see your breath in the wintertime, and I can't remember the last time I've seen my breath. So, though I'm conservative fiscally and believe in small, efficient government, I also come from the business side of this. So I'm from the heating and air conditioning business. I've dealt with energy efficiency products. Living in Seattle, it's a very green mentality out there, but climate change is real. And if there's been that much change in the last 20 years, the prospects, honestly, are scary. What could happen in 20, 30, 40 years from now if we don't act now? So once again, I appreciate everybody having us here tonight, and I'm looking forward to a productive discussion. Thank you.
And you set an excellent example for the others, as that was exactly 2 minutes. I believe, if I have this right, Oz Griebel goes second. Am I right?
You're absolutely right, John.
Oz, take it away.
Thank you all very much. Thank Trinity. Thanks to all the sponsoring agencies for making this forum a reality. My name is Oz Griebel, and as Mark said, there's differences between Democrats and Republicans. I would emphasize there's differences with independents as well. In the back of the room, Monty Frank, who's running with me as Lieutenant Governor. I know he said hello to a number of you earlier, and we're delighted to run as independents, focusing on no parties, no politics, just solutions. Our view is that only an independent governor can bring the parties together and include the private sector in addressing a whole host of issues, including the issue of climate change. I know in the Mark's quote of Pope Francis that this is a moral issue. I would emphasize that this is an economic issue. And the flyer that went out and said, what can Connecticut do to address this issue of climate change? To me, this is all wrapped up in economic growth in terms of energy costs, energy sustainability, energy dependability. All these things are critical to you as residents, and they're critical to you as employees or employers. So the notion of this discussion, I think, is absolutely, we welcome the opportunity to be here. You have on your sheet, and I recognize that no matter how much John does to keep the conversation going, there'll probably be some criticisms, suggestions, questions you have on our specific policies. Encourage you to pick up that palm card and fire away with those comments or questions on our website. The prism in which we're looking at all of our decisions, budget and otherwise, is will those decisions either individually or collectively ensure that Connecticut has the best chance possible of adding 200,000 net new private sector jobs in this state over the next decade. And that's in the context of zero net job growth over the last 30 years. Only with growth will we have the kind of income, the kind of revenue that will allow us to invest in sustainable and renewable energy, invest in transportation, invest in education. So look forward to the discussion. Again, thanks to Trinity and all of the sponsoring agencies for the opportunity to be here this evening.
Minute 45. Ned Lamont, you're third. Please go ahead.
Oz, I think we agreed you're going to thank each of the 24 sponsors. But, look, to Mark's point, thank you for putting a spotlight on the environment. We've been up here campaigning for some time, a long time, and not enough questions confronting one of the biggest issues of our generation. And our parents' generation took on, made the world safe for democracy, and our generation has an equal responsibility over the long term to make darn sure we make this planet safe for our kids and our grandchildren as well. And as was pointed out, this used to be a bipartisan issue. I mean, my God, it was Dick Dixon who created the EPA, and today, what is going on? We have a president that doesn't believe in global warming. We have a president who walked away from the Paris Accords. He put a guy named Pruitt in as head of the EPA, who doesn't believe in any of this. Now he's been replaced by a coal lobbyist, and each and every one of the candidates for governor on the Republican side has said they give Donald Trump an A on issues like this, an A. So what I got to do is two things. A, make sure that this is going to be a bipartisan issue again. I'm so proud to have the Libertarians and the independent candidates here, along with Joe and I, to show that we are united in what this takes. And I won't take a back seat, though, to anybody when it says I'm going to also be passionate about making sure the business community knows that we can have good paying jobs as well as a clean environment. We do these together. It makes the best sense for the future of our state. Thank you so much.
How long was that? About just minute 33.
All right, I'm trying to set the record up. I'm kidding. It's a pleasure and to be joined and to join others here and open up and really create dialogue for us to respond to and hopefully to learn as much as we share with you today. You may know I'm Joe Ganim. I'm mayor of Bridgeport. I'm the Democratic candidate for governor in the August 14th primary. I've talked and repeat as I open that I want to build a new Connecticut economy that works for everyone, not just for a few, based on the principles in many ways, government principles of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. And so as we talk about the environment today, in many ways, this is a critical element or plank in the platform of what we need to look at, I think, for my party, our party, but also as government. Try to do, and as we get into some of the questions and answers, even in old, as we call them sometimes, industrial New England city, like Bridgeport, like we have throughout Connecticut and surrounding states, understand the dynamics of how important the environment is. That sacred trust that we hope that we can pass down, hopefully in no worse condition. I'd like to think if we do this right, maybe with an uptick in as a better environment than was handed to us by the last generation. And there's a lot of ways to do that. One thing we have working against us now and have for a period of time is rhetoric and action from a president who doesn't understand or just won't accept the reality of the world. And one of the obligations I think the next governor has of this state or any state is to speak out and then act against things like pulling out of things like the Paris Climate Accord, of recognizing and acting on things like global warming and reducing carbon footprint, things that we can have an impact over or an impact on. I agree too, in kind of a related note, on this state of the Connecticut budget, we're not going to cut or tax our way out of it. This is going to be with growth, growing the economy, growing jobs. And bottom is going to be jobs. But I also can show you, and hopefully during the course of the examples, the questions, examples in which I participated in one way or another, or understand or recognize that it's not inconsistent with good environmental policy, improving the quality of the environment, being understanding and sensitive to a good quality environment, air, water, land, brownfields and greenfields and so on, is consistent, I believe, in so many ways with building a good economy in our cities, in Connecticut, and throughout Connecticut. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm not going to joke and ask you how long it was. Hopefully I was in the prime time.
Thank you. 2 minutes and 10 seconds. But it's okay. We got a long night ahead of us. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about has to do with the way in which we generate electricity in the state or in the region. Let's start by talking about energy efficiency, something that is always left out of conversations, or at least often left out of conversations like these. And I'll ask you first, Oz Gribble, just to start, talking about specific steps you would take to promote energy efficiency in the state of Connecticut when you take office.
Well, first of all, John, since I have 15 seconds left in the first one, I saw my campaign manager give me an ugly look. The way we get on the ballot is we need signatures, 7,500 of them. Kyle's over there. If you like what I have to say tonight, please sign one of those petitions. That'll help us tremendously. The first thing I would say on the energy efficiency is we have an energy efficiency fund. And we sent out a release the other day pledging that energy efficiency fund and the Green Bank funds that are allocated to it remain in place and not get rated the same way that the Special Transportation Fund has been rated over the years. Their monies are being raised to attract ideas and to help start initiatives to get at the efficiency issue. To me, that's the single most important thing financially we can do. The other thing that to me is the heart of this campaign that Monty and I are running, and that is bringing the private sectors together. Not just the utility companies, not just the renewables, but the consumers and the businesses that use that energy. There's a lot going on in the state today. We have tremendous intellectual capital and everything from solar and wind to fuel cells. How we bring that together so that we can, both for residential purposes and business purposes, take full advantage of that intellectual capital, attract the kind of investment that will put Connecticut up at the pinnacle of energy efficiency. It's bringing people together and taking advantage of this extraordinary assets we have, including with organizations like the Sierra Club and others that are concerned about the environmental impact. Energy cost is a big deal. It's an impediment to job growth, and getting efficiency to reduce those costs, as well as a cleaner overall environment, has to be a critical. It is a major initiative of this. Will be a major initiative of our administration.
Mr. Hanscom, how about you? What specifically do you do to increase energy efficiency at the household level, at the business level, across the state?
Well, myself, I actually come from the heating and air conditioning business, and next to your automobile, there's no bigger energy user than your house. So I've been in the industry for many years now, and actually Connecticut right now has some great plans out there if we keep funding them, and I've worked directly with them. So for instance, in Connecticut, unfortunately about 45% of the homes are still burning heating oil, which is diesel fuel. Because of the amount of rock that's in Connecticut, it's very difficult to run clean burning natural gas lines everywhere. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball with a lot of the states out there with some geographical and just topographical impediments. One thing the state has done is right now is that if you're going from low efficient heating to high efficiency heating systems, for instance, natural gas systems that use very high efficiency blowers, have very minimal emissions out there. Also these new variable speed heat pumps that are hitting the market in large numbers right now. For every kilowatt of electricity these heat pumps use, they're generating 4 kilowatts of heat. So there's some incredibly green products that are out there right now. And I have information myself, because I've dealt with before here in the state of Connecticut, the low interest financing the state has done, the incredible rebates they have out there, but we need to keep funding these programs. With all these budget issues we keep having in the state, they keep trying to raise these funds. Fortunately, I don't think solar survived, but our part of the industry survived. And besides the heating and air conditioning business and keeping energy efficiency moving forward in Connecticut, we also need to look at is whatever we can do to encourage electric vehicles in the state, whether it's more charging stations out there, but also getting the cost of electricity down. I mean, outside of Hawaii, we have the highest kilowatt rates in the nation. I came from the Seattle market where it was 7 cents a kilowatt on average. Now I'm here in Connecticut and it's 21 cents a kilowatt on average. So you get those utility rates down, you'll create more incentives for electric vehicles and for more clean burning, more efficient products out there.
I will come back to you later on this because we're going to be talking about natural gas later. I sensed some uncomfortable shifting in seats when you talked about clean burning natural gas amongst some of the audience. Maybe I'll have you just address that very quickly before we move on, because we are going to come back to natural gas. When you say clean burning natural gas, it's a cleaner burning fuel than oil. By a long shot, but it's not a purely clean source, as many renewable sources are. And there's a lot of concern about the reliance on natural gas in the state. When you say clean burning natural gas, how do you address that issue with people in this audience right here who either don't think that it's burning clean or are quite concerned about where it's coming from?
So the first issue, so just from personal experience on my previous house, when I moved into it, it had an oil burning furnace. Natural gas burns 20 times cleaner than diesel fuel does. Now the furnace that was in the house before was probably 70% efficiency, where these new furnaces are 96 to 98% efficiency. So there is virtually no emissions coming off of this furnace by the time it's all said and done. So after I did that conversion, there's probably 1/100th the emissions coming out of that furnace that there was out of the previous system. We need to keep promoting that in this state, along with variable speed heat pumps, which had no emissions, because we have 45% of the homes burning diesel fuel still. Also on top of that, I had a wood burning fireplace. Well, gas burns 200 times cleaner than wood does, and the fireplace that was installed is 70% efficiency versus 15 when you're burning open burning flames. So by the time it was said and done, my carbon footprint is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of it was before. And there's a point at which, yes, it'd be great if we could have variable speed heat pumps and everybody goes electric, but there's a step in these processes. You can't go from step A to step Z overnight. And natural gas has to be a big part of this equation.
And we'll come back to that. Thank you very much for your answer. Ned Lamont, I'll go to you next and ask about energy efficiency and promoting energy efficiency in a state where obviously it's made such a dent, but obviously it is also money that's taken by the legislature on a fairly regular basis. There's a worry that there's not going to be energy efficiency money moving forward in the state. What do we do about that?
You don't have to worry about that if I'm governor. We made a commitment to do the energy efficiency fund, and I'm going to honor that commitment. Let me tell you why. I mean, for the last 10 years, I was on the board of CSG, Conservation Services Group. It's the largest residential energy efficiency company in the country. And what they do is they provide incentives for homeowners to do this. Commercial doesn't really need these incentives. They're already able to do the cost-benefit analysis, put the money up front, and do a lot, and they've been very much more efficient over the last 20 years. Homeowners, middle-class homeowners, folks in our cities, folks in 1950s, 60s households really need that help. And one of the reasons I love energy efficiency is it gives me a chance to take the environmental issue home to people. I mean, it's not simply that the energy you don't use is the cleanest energy there is and what that does to our global footprint and our health. It also allows me to go to that homeowner and say, do you believe in an energy efficiency fund? Because that means when we make your house more efficient, we're bringing down the price of electricity for you and what that means. And you believe in the energy efficiency fund because it means thousands of good paying jobs for folks who can go out there and weatherize and insulation and get rid of a lot of the worst of the burning appliances out there. And by the way, let me tell you what it means in terms of health for your kids and asthma. What's important as a candidate and as a governor is to communicate with people and tell them in their own language why this is so important to them and their future and their families. So I will be a champion for the Energy Efficiency Fund. We're not going to be looting these funds. This is $150 million. We ought to continue to invest. It's money that you pay for out of your fees, and we're going to put it to the purpose for which it was intended.
Joanne, how about you?
First of all, the fund, $153 million that was rated, first thing is that it needs to be put back and replaced as the first step. No question. Whether it's joining the lawsuit or action by executive order with legislative support, efficiencies, of course, are critical. We try to do some and understanding things, at least in my world, when you're talking about job creation, economic development, whether it's LEED certified buildings, we have elements of that going up from innovative projects. You talked about traveling. I recently traveled to Denmark because Bridgeport will soon, all things working out, will be the home of a thing called a thermal loop. And if anybody knows what a thermal loop, raise your hand. I'm kind of curious to see how. Oh, that's pretty good. Usually I get like one hand and somebody on my staff. So they see,
It's a stacked crowd, kind of.
I appreciate it. But the interesting thing is that a thermal loop is certainly no carbon footprint. It takes actually off of fuel cells. It takes excess or waste, whatever you want to call it, and it heats the water. It's hot water, not steam. And the loop will be in downtown Bridgeport, and it will provide low cost, environmentally friendly, obviously zero carbon footprint heat to existing buildings and bring down the energy costs. Now, this sounds like just simple, and it kind of is, but the only other one in North America is at the Amazon headquarters in Seattle. And so when I went to Denmark, we got like an award. And so I'm standing there like trying to, say all the right things and all that, understanding there were people, there was another mayor there from Asia. And so there was a mayor from North America, there was a mayor there from Europe, mayor there from Asia. And I explained to her, she said, why are you getting the award? I explained this to her and through her interpreter, and she looked at me and she said, well, we do this all the time in other places in the world. This is so common, and this is what we need to do. So I put it out there as an example. We got an award by the U.S. Conference of Mayors for innovation. But at the end of the day, some of these things are just simple priorities, understanding, and frankly, for me, over the process of this, I don't mean to sound like I know a lot about it, it's an educational process. So I support those as members of the General Assembly that stood and fought hard in order to keep this thing moving. We ran against opposition and continue to run against opposition. But it's these type of things that even as I call us older industrial cities that were coal burning plants and had no sensitivity through some of the decades for environment. They were focused on other things, not knowing before the 70s some of the things we know now. We need to be on the cutting edge. In many ways, I'll share with you maybe in the next example some of the other things that we're doing in the the state's largest city.
You know, I want to go to Oz Griebel just to follow up on something. When Mayor Gannon was talking, I remember covering a proposal that was going up in his city some years ago, and I talked to some lawmakers about it, and people were very encouraged that it was going to be built with LEED certified technology, and it was going to make sure that it was energy efficient. And I guess I wonder, as we talk about the state providing economic incentives for businesses either to come here or to build new facilities here, what role you think the government has in saying you can do that, but you're going to have new energy efficient buildings when you come here. If you're going to spend any state money, you're going to make sure that this is an efficient building code.
Well, John, I think the reality, and Ed alluded to this earlier, I think that is the reality with businesses. Businesses aren't looking to build buildings that they're going to consume more energy. So I'm not sure that the state has to put specific incentives in along those lines. I really do believe the private sector is there just in enlightened self-interest. They want to have a higher return on their investment. I do think where the governor plays a role is bringing, as I said a few minutes ago, bringing people together to take full advantage of what intellectual capital is here. So those LEED certification certified buildings, what principles could be applied to the residential community? What principles could be applied to public buildings? I think those are critical elements, John, that have to go into this. No one has a monopoly on the answers here. No one, I think, even has a monopoly on the issues. But the role that the question you have in the flyer is, what's the role that Connecticut can play in global warming? And what Connecticut can do is take care of its own backyard. And I think the idea of the private sector being the lead on this is something we want to build on.
Ned Lamont, so how would you transition Connecticut to 100% clean renewable energy by 2050? Is that a goal of yours? Is that something you think we can do?
That's a goal. We can do it. We can do it in association with a lot of our other states in the region who are doing the same thing. And Connecticut's always taken the lead on this, and we're going to take a lead on 2050. I agree with Oz in the sense that we don't need a lot of big corporate incentives for them in terms of energy efficiency. It's on the residential side that we have so much of our waste, and most of the savings can be there. I talked about the Energy Efficiency Fund. I'll talk about also the Green Bank. And the Green Bank is funding that is there to provide sort of startup interim financing that can be leveraged 10 to 1, and it can represent hundreds of millions of dollars. To give people that added incentive when it comes to solar and other types of renewable powers they have there. And what the state has done is continued to loop that fund as well. We were there meeting with the Green Bank the other day, and they said, look, if you're going to cut us a little bit, but do it over 5-10 years so we can count on the money we've got. They lost a zero-interest loan from Bank of America because the state of Connecticut gives them the money, takes it away, gives it, takes it away. We have to have a little bit of consistency there to do that. So on the residential side, as you get to 2050, there's enormous savings to be had, and those would be priorities for me going forward.
Mr. Hanson, how about you? I mean, can we get there? Can we get to 100% clean renewable energy by 2050?
It's a very hard prediction, to be quite honest. I was doing some research today, and right now, 24 out of 50 U.S. states are energy producers themselves. They produce natural gas or oil. So when you're competing against that, if the costs are lower, what's their incentive going to be to go to 100% renewable? So as much as I am very green-minded myself, with the LED lighting in the house and the high-efficiency furnace and the natural gas-burning fireplace and the tankless water heater that has no energy loss on the standby, there's also the economic reality that we're competing against 50 other states. So as much as we want to incentivize and get our utility rates down and keep pushing forward with green energy, we don't know what the future brings as far as oil and gas costs. Last week I was in Louisiana for the national convention for our party. A good friend of mine lives in southern Louisiana himself, and he works in the oil and gas industry. And the technology they have now to extract gas and oil is actually mind-blowing, that they can drill 4 miles into the ocean and go deep and drill this. Actually, it's quite amazing, but it's the reality. I'm not saying that I'm supporting it, I'm saying it's the reality of what. Please, folks, come on. I'm saying it's the economic reality of what we're going up against. So as much as we want to push green energy, and I do believe in it, I don't want to start driving utility costs so far north in Connecticut that businesses and people start leaving to go to less cost energy states like Texas and like Washington.
Oz, you want to jump in?
Just a quick thing on goals that I think we have to be honest about. I think we've moved the renewable goal out to 2030 again. That we keep moving the goal, and the likelihood is I won't be here in 2050. The idea that there's always a hockey stick that gets you to the goal. We, as governor and elect, we have to have honest discussions with ourselves. Are we making meaningful progress towards any goal, whatever one you want to say? And how does that line up with funding? How does it line up with practice? How does it line up with policy? And the idea that we're going to have, this is not a knock on Ned or anybody else on the goals. The goal is what's the measurable progress against that, and not just waiting around to 2048 and then praying like crazy that it's all going to come about in 2 years.
Giovanna, I want you to jump in on this.
Yeah, and it certainly is a goal, and I think a lot of these efficiencies, it said, 70% of them, 70% of the way is through efficiencies. You talk about homes, businesses, all that. I think there's all of it. But the goal and the prioritization of that as a goal, it sets the tone. And if it comes from the governor and it's a priority, then it has a realistic, if it's a realistic goal, and it's really a priority, then you got a shot. Then you got a shot at it. If you don't even set it as a goal. So it's 2050, 2040, 20, and if you get smart people around the room and you start laying out, look, Copenhagen has they want to get this, I think it's zero carbon footprint by, I want to say it's like 2030. Of course, they burn grass there. I mean, they just have it's a different physical dynamic and rules and all that. But other states are doing other things. I've worked as a consultant in 3 states, mostly southern, and I've seen what they've been able to do with some of the incentive programs, even on the industrial side, with 1% loans and matching grants for cutting your lighting bill to 50% saving millions of dollars. Worked with one of the largest recyclers of aluminum cans and seeing how this with sites all over the country, and even in New York with the small R&D company looking to rid plastics, taking the BTUs from plastics and turning them into biofuel. As a way to get them out of the waste stream, because it's such a challenge everywhere. So I think there's more, again, with smarter people certainly than me, and I don't mean that know the elements of how we do it, and then with the grasping and joining on those priorities, setting them from priorities from the governor's office with a supportive legislature, I think you begin the process step by step. I have others, but I think I'll probably run out.
No, that's good. Ned, you want to jump back in?
I just wanted, there was a reference to the fact that if we push renewables too much, we push some of these alternative technologies, we could potentially drive up the price of electricity. And I think that is really old thinking. What we have right now in Connecticut is probably the highest priced electricity in the lower 48. It's an enormous competitive disadvantage for us. And the smartest thing you do with a smart environmental policy is do everything you can to reduce the peak load. What that means is what we can do with solar power and storage that allows us to reduce peak load on hot days like this with air conditioning, and what you can do with wind power off the Rhode Island and New London coast, and what that can mean in terms of the winter and providing a lot of support. I think you're going to be able to argue, and I will argue every day, that smart renewable policies help us hold down the price of electricity, which makes Connecticut a lot more competitive going forward.
Let's get to some of that. Our state lags behind other states in our region and certainly others in the country in terms of production of wind and solar power. In part, that is because we don't have that in as much abundance as some other places, but also because, in part, it's been difficult to site these projects in some communities. I'll start with you, Mr. Hanscom. How do you ensure that the state's producing renewable energy, like solar and wind, while respecting the rights of municipalities that may or may not want those sites in their backyards?
It's a very difficult balance, to be honest, because every time we try to do wind power across the country, even very rural areas, there's always certain opposition out there. Traveling through Germany last year, I know Mayor Gannon mentioned being in Denmark, but I was in Germany last year also. There's windmills everywhere, solar power everywhere, because they don't have oil companies. So it's in their national interest to go renewable and go alternative. One thing we do have, as much as I do like renewables, it's also geographically, you're correct, where can they go? Being blocked by Long Island, let's be honest, we don't have the same amount of wind they have in the center part of the United States or like Boston has. So yes, New London would be the area for it. And I think it's a great way. It's also a great way to spur jobs. I was on Block Island last year looking out, and they have several offshore windmills going in. I'd love to see that here in Connecticut also. are they economically viable to put in every place? I don't think it's economically viable in Stamford. I live in Stamford. To be honest, it's not that windy. It's just blocked too much. But where we can have wind farms, I think one of the things about being the governor is pushing that conversation forward, doing what we can to get renewable energy going in the state, and also to be a leading voice out there, and also share experiences by traveling and what other places are doing.
So Joe Gannon, what do you do specifically to get more solar and wind generation, specifically right here in the state? Because there are other places. More is being built off of Martha's Vineyard soon. There's more going in nearby, but not necessarily controlled by Connecticut. What do you do to get more solar and wind?
And I think the premise where you say, at least as one municipal leader, the municipalities that don't want this, I don't think that's so. At least the municipal leaders that I work with, whether it's in the state or across the country, are very much on cutting edge. Even the National Association, U.S. Conference of Mayors, where we've stood together against the president on his withdrawal and his lack of recognition of global warming and the Peace Corps. But so for my city, what we've done, I can tell you what we've done. When I first came in, we closed the landfill. Closed it, and now my predecessor, well, I was in twice and come back mayor. So my successor or predecessor, depending on how you count, smartly created a solar farm there. So these are the type of things, the limited uses you can do to close landfill until you know the process, and landfills are a whole story. But that's a smart move. And if you can find places, and we have a Sikorsky Airport that Bridgeport owns, the Stratford, open space. If you can figure out a way all those open spaces where you can put solar panels, where I've seen, is one way to do it. The comments about wind, certainly offshore, talked about, I think, in the London area and elsewhere, are ways in which we can and should do more. I mean, I go back to that step by step, how do you get to a goal? So I got first elected in '91, for those of you who are as old as me, or if you're not, bear with me. And the city was broke, in bankruptcy. And it was just the time when they passed the blue bins, remember, and they were like, we want the blue bins. I was like, I don't have money for police cars. But we went ahead and we said, this is important. And we bit the bullet, and we started with the blue bins, and we started household recycling and separation. So step by step, it seems like, what do you mean? People don't even remember how long that was like a step. So these are things that as you work towards a goal. But where you can make those adjustments, where you can do it, you can and you should, local, state, federal level, to do that more as Connecticut's governor.
Then Lamont, how about you?
I'll follow up on that. Joe mentioned his predecessor, Bill Finch. In some really tough situation, he became one of the great environmental mayors, and Joe's been able to follow on a lot of the leads he took, including the idea of community solar. That's one of the laws that we've changed. We're going to see. So those that can't necessarily put solar in each and every roof, we can do that on a community-wide basis and share that. Number two, let me tell you, Connecticut, for some reason, our state has something like 3,000 buildings. I don't know how we got into the real estate business, so we ought to get rid of, say, 2/3 of them. But those that are left, those we're using, there's solar on less than 1% of them. So you talk about objections to putting up, I guarantee you there won't be any objection to doing that. It'll be cleaner energy, reduce the price of power for our folks, starting at Central Connecticut State University, John. And when it comes to wind, where do you find wind? Let me tell you, offshore wind, way offshore, 50, 100 miles, there's dramatic blowing wind, especially in the winter, that provides a consistent power source for us. A power source that really complements power when we need it during the winter. Helps us reduce our dependence on fossil fuels when it comes to heating and electrification. It's going to be an enormous change. Believe me, way out there's not that many objections.
Osgood, will you have a thought on this before you switch?
Well, I can't help myself to say there's a lot of weight coming out of the Capitol down the Capitol. We probably could generate something right there if we could capture it. That one was too easy, John. I couldn't help myself. A couple of things just to build on this. I think the idea, John, you mentioned, what could we do for incentives to buildings? And I think I'll just build off of something that Ed said. We have an idea of taking state-owned assets, not the public parks and not the buildings like the Capitol and Supreme Court building, but looking to securitize those assets and then use the proceeds to contribute to the unfunded liability issue. I know that's not the topic here, but if you were to sell those buildings, then you could, to the real estate developer, say, if you want to take this package, or the packages, let's put solar panels on there. I think those are the kinds of these things, when we talk about these issues, it isn't as if climate change and energy in a silo all by itself. It's interrelated with everything from transportation to affordable housing, and the way we get these to interact is only by bringing people together to have a comprehensive view on this. On the solar panel thing, I mean, clearly those of us who drive on Mass Pike, you see a number of them right on the exits. I think you need to look at some of those opportunities that are there. And at the same time, I think this was mentioned a minute ago, we've got to look at have honest discussions about where we have competing interests. So out in Simsbury right now, you have a fight going on between putting the solar panels out there and some concerns about the takeover of agricultural land. And again, I think our local, the farm to table kind of concept, it may not seem like it's part of this discussion, but I would argue it's very much part of a discussion of how we want Connecticut to be a premier state on all issues, whether it's energy, local agriculture, job growth, and the like. And so these things, I think, we have to have the honest discussions, the honest food fights over the issues, but not necessarily the food fight over who's in charge of making those policy decisions.
I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to jump in with this. So if we're going to try to put solar on state buildings, certainly get more incentives to go in brownfield locations, maybe some agricultural land where it works. What about people who put solar on top of their houses already? How do you make sure that electric ratepayers who generate solar power are fairly compensated for the fact that they're putting money back into the system? Anyone want to take that on?
Yeah, I think that the cap on net metering is insane in this state. We should do everything we can. Send people to put solar on there. They're going to have storage. They'll be able to use it some of the time, and also the opportunity to sell it back onto the grid at retail rates. We're going to have to find a way so that Eversource can continue to take care of their grid. But let me tell you, capping that is capping solar power. So I want to find one way that I can really incent people, continue to allow them to put solar up and sell it back onto the grid.
Mr. Hanscom, you were applauding.
Absolutely, I was applauding. I did hear recently that with some of the changes in Hartford and with the raid on the energy fund, that they did want to cap net metering. Well, the idea that if somebody's creating electricity and there's another user out there and you're doing it a clean way with spinning your meter backwards and having reverse metering, in no way, shape, or form should we be against that. I can't even believe that passed. And in all ways, yes, we will 100% support net metering at all times.
Did you want to jump in on?
Just a quick thing, John, and sort of being the black cloud on all this, when we talk about incentives, I just hope we're all having an open, our eyes are wide open on the significant budget challenge that we're facing. So if we're giving incentives over here, we have to have an honest discussion about either where we're going to raise taxes elsewhere or cut spending. We're looking at anywhere from $2 to $2.5 billion operating deficit. In the next biennium, we're looking at a $300+ million operating deficit in the current budget. And we're going to have, our administration will have to engage a lot of you in the discussion about what the priorities are, because they won't just fall out of bed as if we were sitting on top of a $2.5 billion surplus. So these are going to be significant, serious discussions that we're going to have to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. As I said earlier, making meaningful progress on these fronts without necessarily bankrupting the state any further than it already is.
But let me just follow up on that. Sure. There's the question of bankrupting the state, but there's a question of smart investments. If you make smart, small-term investments that people can then, have more energy-efficient houses. I mean, I don't know, Joe Bannon, one of the things
there's a disconnect on that for me. Balance of budgets, and I've been through all the budget balancing, and continue to do 14 of them. If you turn around and you compromise on priorities like this, and I don't think that's the issue. I think it's pushback from the industry is what we're seeing. So you set priorities, follow through. If we don't at least have some semblance of a goal on a better environment, protecting the damage we're doing to our environment, unintentionally I hope, but it's happening every day, then where are we going to be as we go forward? I mean, that whole next generation.
Just be clear, I'm not talking about getting rid of the aspirations.
You just gave me the opportunity.
No, but my point is, I just think we are dealing with reality, Joe.
I know budget reality.
And that's
dealt with it. We're talking about priorities, about the environment.
Correct.
About the air we breathe. Okay, we're talking sometimes about environmental justice for asthma, for inner city youth. We're talking about clean water, Long Island Sound, and all of that. So it's just
I'm with you with the priorities, Joe. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying it's just the reality that we have to deal with.
I'm going to move to some of your questions, and we're starting to get more of them. Please, if you haven't yet turned in your cards and you have questions, there's a basket going around. It's lovely. You can just put them in the basket. We'll get as many of these questions as we possibly can. There's so much to get to before we get to some audience questions. Well, let me ask this, and I'll start with Mr. Hanscom. We touched on this before. There are a lot of concerns, not just in the state, but around the region, about the ways in which gas companies, utilities have said we need to have more natural gas infrastructure, more pipelines. What pipelines mean for people as they go through their communities, it's something that's happening in their backyard that they might very well be scared about for a variety of environmental reasons. There's also a question, you talked about a pathway for a cheap and renewable form of natural gas. I've been hearing about that pathway being 5 years, 10 years, maybe 20 years. The question is there's not any real idea as to when natural gas is going to stop being cheap altogether. So when we start building all this natural gas infrastructure, including these pipelines, doesn't that suggest a long-term play where Connecticut is going to be reliant on natural gas to the exclusion of some of the renewable technologies that we're talking about?
Can I ask a question to that?
Sure.
So, what reports are they predicting? How much natural gas supply do we have in the United States right now?
How much natural gas
Supply do we have proven
overall?
in the United
10
States
years
right now?
certain.
10 years. I think it's 50 years.
So we have somebody in the audience who says 10 years certain. We have you saying 50 years, but I think that's less my point. That if we build the infrastructure, it's not about the total amount of supply. It's about the supply and the cost, and all the potential costs that come with it. You've got a nearby state, Pennsylvania, which does extraction of natural gas, another nearby state, New York, which doesn't do extraction of natural gas in this way. I guess I'm just asking that by doubling down the building of pipelines and continued building of natural gas infrastructure, do you in some way yoke up Connecticut to a natural gas economy that won't then transition to a renewable economy?
I understand. Yeah. Well, once again, it is a balance. And the other product is when we talk about the heating and air conditioning business. The one product that's out there, and I don't know how familiar the audience is with different green products out there and which of them are selling and what's available out there, but beyond running natural gas lines, it's very expensive to run natural gas lines. I would be an enormous proponent of going to 100% efficient heat pumps. There's newer heat pumps out there. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Mitsubishis and the Fujitsus. These companies are now coming to the United States because this market is taken off like wildfire. A heat pump, it's an air conditioner that works in reverse. It extracts heat out of the outside air. These new products right now, they're working at 90% efficiency when it's 14 degrees below zero outside. These are systems that are heating houses with zero emission whatsoever, and you don't have to run any gas line whatsoever to get there. It's extremely expensive to run these gas lines over the state, especially in Connecticut when you notice how much rock we have everywhere. So don't get me wrong, I look at everything as a holistic combination of what's going to be the energy issues in the future, the energy answers in the future. And believe it or not, the #1 market in the country for these super high efficiency ductless heat pumps is in Maine. There's not enough of a population to run gas lines everywhere. It's very cold. Energy costs are high. So what they're doing there, we can do here also. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm Mr. Natural Gas here. I'm for clean energy too. But at the same time, there's the economic reality of what people are going to pay for. And when it economically makes sense, like it does with these variable speed heat pumps, which are expensive, when it economically makes sense, the consumer does it. The consumer needs to be educated more.
Ned, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think it economically makes sense to not invest $6.6 billion into a natural gas pipeline. First of all, your question was well taken. This is not a 10-year investment. This is a 30 to 40-year investment. And you are beginning to freeze out competing alternatives when you do that. Secondly, it's extraordinarily expensive, especially if you think it's just going to be transition for 10 years until we go to renewables. To finance $6.6 billion, you're going to see that in your rate card overnight. And the most expensive electricity in the country is going to get a lot more expensive. And thirdly, I think we are making that transition right now. I may not have said that 5 or 10 years ago, but the price of solar has become very competitive. The price of wind power, as I described, has become so competitive that we are already in that transition. We don't have to spend $6.6 billion as a backup.
But Joe Gannon, if you've got companies, utilities, saying, we have a bottleneck, we don't have enough natural gas capacity here in the state, what do you do? Because, as Mr. Hanscom said, natural gas is something that a lot of people use right now at the residential level. It's something that we're using to fire up a lot of power plants still around the region. What do we do?
Yeah, first of all, I agree on not spending the 6.6 billion. I think that's just poor use of investment. I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that. I think there are, and the rhetoric out of the industries, whether it's the natural gas or oil, it depends on who you want to listen to, what set of facts. I'm not as in depth as some, but they put it out there. I do know on some of the things that I've seen investments on. I'll give you an example of what we did that I know it benefits us. When we were smart, and I'm not going to take credit for this, I'll just say we were smart. When we built downtown a ballpark and an arena, we needed to build a parking garage. We put it right next to the train station and the highway. And it's a 900-car parking garage. So now individuals can easily park, free parking by the way, because it's very difficult in Fairfield and surrounding towns to get a parking spot. 900 cars that are off of I-95, not commuting either Stanford or New York every day. So you can do the math on that 5 days a week. It's at least one, call it a small step, but I call it a significant step in trying to address some of the things that we have with smart investment in infrastructure. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and Oz Grable, before we move on, do you have a thought on this about the building of natural gas infrastructure, especially when it's going to cost Connecticut ratepayers and taxpayers?
Well, I think the balancing act is we're not going to have people freeze, John. And I do think that the speed in which we're moving to renewables is there. We ought to be emphasizing that. I fully agree with the comments that have been made in that sense. The idea of taking some of that 6.6 billion, if that was the number, that was going to be in the budget, putting some of that into the energy efficiency fund so existing homes would be able to take advantage of being able to burn the oil or the natural gas they have more efficiently. I think we are moving along. I agree with Ned's comment. I think 10 years ago, the idea that I probably did say we should build natural gas pipelines. That's the reality. I think the reality that's changed in the last decade is what's allowing us to have a much more serious discussion that makes it economically feasible.
I want to move on to some of the audience questions, and what's always so great about doing one of these events is all of your questions are basically all the questions I was going to ask anyway. It's very, very good, like we're all in this together. Let me start with this one, and I don't think the names are on here. So the questioner says, 50 cities and towns have banned fracking waste in anticipation for future state regulations. Do you support a permanent ban on fracking waste statewide, and will you support the town's authority, I should have brought my reading glasses, the town's authority to keep their ban instead of preemption? Okay, so the question is about banning of fracking waste. Let's just start to the left. I mean, would you ban fracking waste in the state?
I would allow this. As a libertarian, I believe that the most efficient government is the smallest government, and the best government is at the local levels. No, I would not ban any city from having its own regulations.
So cities can have their own regulations, but you don't support a statewide regulation?
I do not.
Okay.
I think we should ban fracking. I don't think we need that here. I've seen and heard and read some of the challenges other places have, and I do.
Another one?
Transporting fracking waste, and I would ban that in Connecticut.
To help Connecticut achieve its goal of... Mark said I've been doing this for 30 years, and this is the first time I've actually felt like I've been doing this for 30 years. To help Connecticut achieve its goal to put more electric vehicles on the road, will you support allowing the direct sale of Teslas in Connecticut? Oz Grable.
I have to look really hard, John, at the impact that it has on our current auto dealers. I think the idea of having more electric cars here makes all the sense in the world. We've also got 15,000 people working in there that they push back against. So my point on this is I would listen to both sides before I came to a specific decision.
Why would, I take your point, I was wondering, other auto dealers are obviously going to not want to have a competitor in the marketplace. I mean,
without the dealership, and that's the issue, it has to deal with the idea of being a dealer in as opposed to selling directly. That's the issue that's been brought to my attention, and I think it's a serious one.
Joe Gannon, go ahead, you can go next.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get to that, but I think where we can move ahead directly with electric buses. I think, and we've done that in our transit district now. I think we've got 6 that are coming in. We can look even towards electric school buses, at least on a municipal level. These are things that we should do. Little jokingly, I think, I don't know if Ned's driving a Tesla in that commercial or not, but might be, I don't know, you gotta ask him that. I'm not a big Tesla fan. I am for electric cars, electric buses, any way that we can transition over to electric.
Would you, though, support allowing the direct sale of Teslas in Connecticut?
You know, I'm for electric cars. I'm not a Tesla fan. I don't know if they represent really the model that we want to put forth as far as what the electric cars in Connecticut should look like. I'm in every way that I can, but I have a little struggle with the Tesla.
You have a struggle specifically with the Tesla?
The Tesla.
Okay.
Hope you don't mind.
I have it on good authority, Ned Lamont was not driving a Tesla. I don't know if that changes your opinion at all.
Ned didn't have the own one, so he's probably got a different opinion than mine.
Ned Lamont, would you support the direct sale of Teslas?
Yeah, I would. I say welcome to the 21st century. All have independent control of their dealerships, and Tesla likes to have a central control. We can work that out. You want to do everything you can to encourage electric car ownership in the state. That's one of the things I think.
No, and also as a libertarian, I'm very much a free market-minded person myself, and if there is value for a car company competing, going direct to the end user to get the cost down, I would in no way get in the way of that. I would support it 100%. If it's viable, it's up to the company to decide for themselves if that's the best way to go about selling their vehicles.
And I apologize, I'll stay with you, and there's a follow-up question here. I think Mayor Ganem has already answered this question in part. But the question is, what will you do to support the electrification of transportation in communities of color?
How is that different than what it is for everybody else?
Well,
I'm out of Stanford, so yeah.
I'm going to guess, I'm going to presume I
make incentives for electric cars to be more affordable for. Is that what the question is?
Well, I referred to Mayor Ganem earlier. He was talking about buses. He was talking about other sorts of transportation. The presumption I think is that there probably aren't going to be a lot of Teslas on the road in Bridgeport on a regular basis anytime soon. So,
sure, but there's other electric vehicles that are much less expensive than a Tesla is. So, I mean, the Nissan Leaf and others. But go ahead.
No, I was just so I didn't know if you had any other further thoughts on it. I was just asking the question.
And can you just rephrase that one more time? Because you kind of lost me with the people, so I don't understand the importance of that. But
what will you do to support the electrification of transportation in communities of color?
Are you referring to poor communities? Is that what the question is?
I'm literally reading the card just right here that's given to me, and I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, that question, I really personally have a problem with questions like that. If it's communities that don't have access or poor communities, I like that. Of color, I take a. I don't like answering that question.
Fair enough.
I'll finish. So in Seattle, I'll give you an example in Seattle that I use in Seattle. So in Seattle, they had a great program out there. It was called their Green Energy Program. So a lot of people can't afford $15,000 to $25,000 for solar on the house. They can't afford to have electric vehicles, for instance. But Seattle had a great program. They created windmills outside of the city in the eastern part of the state. And then for an individual homeowner, if you wanted to participate in that green program, it only cost you $25 every 2 months, and you were a green home. Now, of course, the electric company can't send that electricity directly to your house, but you have a way to directly subsidize these large-scale programs. These large-scale programs produce much more electricity at much lower cost than what a lot of people can afford at their house. So that's the type of program I would go to open it up for everybody, I would say.
Thank you. No, that's great. Thank you very much for that. Grable?
Just a couple things. You open up transportation, and I think, as I said earlier, you have to look at these things on an integrated basis. The idea that we need to invest in mass transit, which fundamentally in this state is bus transportation, putting Metro North off to one side. People who come into Hartford, people knock the busway. They say it's always empty. A lot of people depend on that bus to get in downtown for their jobs. Buses are the heart of a lot of mass transit for many people in the cities. And I would say when you go to the Putnams and the Torringtons of the world, the same issue is there. People who cannot afford a car, cannot afford 2 cars, depend upon bus service. which means we need to look hard at how we're preserving the Special Transportation Fund. So there is an amendment on the ballot on November 6th to have put this lockbox in. I'm not wild about the language, but we need to secure that money so we can provide the kind of service to all people, the mass transit service to all people where it's needed. We need to have a serious discussion about electronic tolls because the gasoline tax is not going to carry us to enable us to take care of whether they're diesel-powered buses or electric-powered buses. We need to look at things of moving the containers out of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey by barge into New London, New Haven, and into Bridgeport so that we can reduce the congestion and the pollution on the highway. The whole notion of climate change is not just about energy costs. It's about the way that energy is used and what we in Connecticut can do to make a major difference by taking a look at these problems in the aggregate.
Good question, John. Absolutely. In our cities where people are dependent on buses, be they public buses, school buses, these are things that we can control, we can impact, we can influence, we can do everything we can to move that to electronics as soon as we can. And as Joe mentioned, what that means in terms of asthma, what that means in terms of health, and one other thing, what that means in terms of people being able to get around, get access to work, get access to school, get out of the automobile, reduce automobile congestion. And Oz is correct. I mean, you got to find a way to pay for this. The Republicans have said we have a transportation crisis, or we're going to pay for it by more borrowing. Well, we've come up with a solution. I have anyway. I'd like to follow Rhode Island's lead. At least I'd like to put electronic tolling on those big tractor-trailer trucks. They're barreling their way through our state, destroying our roads and bridges. Money can go to upkeep and maintenance there and help us move slowly towards our public transportation be more electronic, more carbon-free.
Very quickly, what about tolls on individual cars or congestion pricing that would, in part, in many cities, it's worked to shut down the number of people that are on the roads at peak times a day? Do you support that, Ned?
I'd say one step at a time. I just noticed the legislature, every single Republican in the legislature turned down electronic tolling on cars flag. I think I can get it done in tractor-trailer trucks pretty quickly. We'll see where it goes from there, John.
What would you do with that, Joe Gannon?
Well, I want to go back to the environmental justice question that was started with, and we touched tolls at the end. And it goes to the asthma. I was going to talk about the challenges that the buses, when you see a black plume come off the cloud for bus exhaust and so on, and the necessity of that type of public transportation. Look, we love the concept of commuting and not driving a car. Most people aren't riding a city bus because they have a car and they don't want to use it. This is a necessity. It's a necessity to get to a doctor's office or get to a job. So these are elements of life for people that aren't, frankly, driving Teslas, okay? So in my city anyways, we seem to forget somewhere along the equation of the challenges that are there, whether it's brownfields from old factories that still exist, and the obligation we have to create green fields so people can have, so the city itself, which provides the services and the support for so many of people of greatest need with least economic means, are addressed. So this whole kind of head fake of what we're talking about is not part of the world that I want to be a part of, nor will I stand for as mayor or as Connecticut State's governor. Environmental justice and the environment is an element we need to focus on, and that I want to be a loud voice on. Do you want something on tolls?
Yeah, do you support tolls on passenger cars, congestion pricing in cities or highways?
Congestion pricing, if we can do it, absolutely. I want to push it on out-of-state users who come in and bust up on our highways with their trucks that are polluting us as well and driving through and taking advantage.
Mr. Hanson, how about you?
I'm not a supporter of tolls. The only toll I would consider is congestion tolling on I-95 and the other busy highways during rush hours of the week.
Oz Greenwell, could you just follow up on that a little bit? Because you brought up the question of tolls.
I sure can. The idea of electronic tolls, we've been for this for at least the last 17 years, John. And Ned pointed out we can't get any agreement on this. It's got to be part of a comprehensive transportation strategy. And I do believe this is tied to economic justice, because if you want to move to electric buses, you've got to be able to find a way to pay for it. And so my simple point is electronic tolls are part of this discussion. We took the tolls away after the tragedies in the 80s. The federal government put money in here. So the federal government still has to approve our reestablishment of tolls of any kind, but clearly of the electronic tolls that allow Mass Pike and the others. My suggestion is in the near term, to show that there's actually action, is that we could toll the HOV lanes on 91 and 84 Find a way to give people credit for having 2 or more people in the car, because that's what originally the HOV lanes were designed to do. But put that electronic tolling in place, because I believe all you need is the Federal Department of Highway authority to do that. And start playing with congestion pricing. Let's see what would happen if we put it in. Let's see what would happen with people who don't have an easy pass. How would we build them? This idea of waiting around for 20 years to take away a very important funding source for us long term is nonsensical. And so, as coming right in, I believe we could put those tolls in July and begin to move as quickly as we could to putting electronic toll systems in on the 3 major interstates, 91, 95, and 84.
I want to switch topics, and this is a question that I've been covering for some time, and it's very important for all of the state and all of the region, not just the shoreline. The questioner asks, we know that substantial sea level rise is now inevitable. Much of our critical infrastructure, as well as residential and commercial properties, is along the shoreline. How will you manage and plan for moving all of this away from the rising seas? Who'd like to go first on that? Joe, yeah, go first.
Simple question, easy to answer. I'm joking to a certain extent. Certainly, it's one of those challenges if you take a step back. But what we are doing, and again, this is the product of being a mayor and having to deal with some of these challenges. In this case, on a city that's on Long Island Sound. So we have waterfront, we have low-lying water, and we have recently participated in the receipt of a $55 million federal resiliency grant. So the backdrop to that is that we have parcels of land, potential investment, job-creating property along Bridgeport waterfront, along Seaside Park. It's landlocked from financing and investment because banks won't lend on it because of the recent increase in the 100-year flood levels. And so without that, without a resiliency plan, you're kind of in a difficult situation to allow development there, and frankly to have safe egress for your residents. So we have plenty of residents in the waterfront. So part of that is a plan, and I can get into the details. Primarily it's dry egress. Is a demonstrated plan to utilize those funds. To understand the dynamics of what may or may not be a process that we're faced with over the next years and decades, and begin to address it. Now, $55 million is the largest single unmatched grant that city has ever received, but it's a pittance in what needs to be done along the entire coastline. We talk about Connecticut and New York and New Jersey all participating, because you can't do this in a vacuum, either by one singular community or even by a singular state. But the dynamics of that is something we as a state have to understand. I think we have to be more out in the front of, instead of just sitting back waiting for federal government, which under this administration is probably not going to give any support for. But that's the type of challenges, some of the things we're doing locally on this type of challenge.
Ned Lamont, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, about dealing with rising sea levels, the fact that there's so much private property, there's so much critical infrastructure. What do you do over the course of your administration to retreat a bit from the rising seas?
Rising seas could be as much as half an inch a year at this point. It's extraordinary. Look what Hurricane Sandy, the devastation that did. Look what it cost New York City when it came to information technology, telecommunications, telephone, electric. So DEEP doesn't really have the capacity to think about this right now. So that is a responsibility of the governor, that's a responsibility of the state, to work in association with our local communities, to make sure we plan for that. I care about the homeowners, I care about their ability to protect their homes, but first and foremost, I think about the IT infrastructure, the telephone, the electric, moving that back from that very dangerous place, because the devastation that can cause to our state over time is a lot. We don't do things very quickly. We've got time to do this, but we better start now.
Rod Hanscom, how about you? How do you deal with sea level rise?
To be honest, there's no doubt that there's sea level rise across the world. We know that that's happening. When I don't have all the information, I just have to be honest sometimes. There's thousands of topics out there, thousands of issues. I have not seen any official reports as far as how much sea level rise we've seen in Connecticut so far and how much we're predicted to see in the near future. So until I really have all the facts and once again take a holistic approach to everything and look at everything, I honestly don't have an answer to this question at this time.
Fair enough. Oz Riebel, do you have a thought?
Just a couple thoughts, John. Do I have a thought? I mean, that's just to use the Sandy example that Ned mentioned, I think it also calls into this whole issue of distributed energy. We didn't get into that. I don't know that we'll have time, but the idea of microgrids, the storms, the issue of terrorism strikes and all that, I think we need to look at a much more out of my league in terms of knowledge, but the idea of bringing some smart people in and understanding how can we take advantage of the solar, the wind, the other renewables, and make sure they're stored, and we can use that energy when we have a crisis. On this topic of John, what was the question?
Sea level rise.
The sea level rise. So when I was at the Alliance, we had an organ when Dan Esty was head of DEEP. He brought in several of the insurance companies. We have two of the major property and casualty companies here in the country, in the Hartford and Travelers. And the idea of bringing those folks together, bringing in Avery Point and the knowledge that's down at UConn, bringing in the knowledge that's at the Yale University School of Forestry. We have an awful lot of smart people in here that can start to pull some ideas together, not only to remove, as Ned said, some of our key IT lines and whatnot, but what is the right and fair way to take care of these very serious issues we have built up along the coast. They're highly prized places that people want to either live or have as second homes. Obviously, the beaches as recreational areas and our public parks are also a critical element of this. It's not just the residents, it's what happens to the erosion in the public beaches that we have along the Sound. So all those things need to be put on the table, and I think, as I said several times in this forum, we need to bring the best and the brightest into the room to have serious discussions about both what the issues are and how we can best address them.
You know, actually, I was going to ask this question next, but somebody asked something very similar to that, Oz, and I'll just follow up with you. I mean, how do you find the best and the brightest? Who do you look to for information on these issues? Because not everyone's going to be an expert at all of them.
Well, John, I think it's something like the broad area of energy. I think you've got an awful lot of smart people in this area, in the private sector. Clearly, you have the utilities that can be part of the discussion. You have people in environmental groups that have a view on this. Whether you bring in, it's not a cast of 50,000. But I think there are plenty of people you can go to, John, in this state and identify and say, let's have that discussion. And you need to have the right administrative agency, like DEEP, needs to be part. It's not like you're going to run away from the existing regulatory structure. But I think there are plenty of folks, I'm sure, at this table, the four of us can identify very smart people in all these areas that would help develop a comprehensive strategy.
You have some thoughts on that? Because I'd love to know where you find the information on these issues.
Oh no, so I just wanted to add myself also is that, as we noticed tonight, there's no Republicans up here. And as I was driving up here tonight, because I am conservative leaning myself, I was like, well, is this really where I'm going to find many votes, or should I participate? But one of the things I've learned over the years is regardless of what your beliefs are or what you think you don't know everything. And in order to learn and make the best policy decisions out there, you have to engage everybody. You have to engage people on the right, people on the left, people in the middle, and learn. And from people in this group, I learn, every day I learn things from people. In my sales career, just talking to people, learning about their lives, what they're dealing with. So I would just say, as far as finding the best talent isn't always the most educated people out there. It can be in all walks of life, all across the board. So the reason I'm here today is to show that, yes, regardless of where we might stand politically and philosophically, I want to be out there engaging all groups out there, and I'm sure there's a ton I can learn from this group in here to help with the best policy decisions.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on what both Oz and Rod said. I mean, right now in politics, it's a bit of an echo chamber, I find. I come out of the private sector, I built up a system, and to Rod's point, yeah, I want the academics, I want the theoreticians, I want the practitioners who have actually done it, I want folks from a wider variety of folks, of backgrounds, weighing in on the decisions we have in government in general and on this issue in particular. I think there's too much of an echo chamber, a bit of a Hartford ecosystem here. We got to open up our search. I would work like heck every day to get the widest variety of talent from all different backgrounds, different parties to come and weigh in and help us with these solutions.
Joanna?
I've got some certainly criticism of the effectiveness of some of the state agencies and how they work together and what needs to be done. I think a better coordination, leadership from the top to efficiencies, DEEP being one that can work better with economic development, which will work better with transportation, in partnerships with local governments, especially those that have some of the biggest challenges, like brownfields and those elements, with a set of priorities that understand the dynamics better than I do, certainly maybe with some input from many in the room here about the environment. How can we make advancements? And those advancements complement the creation of a job growth economy. I don't think, and I think I said in my opening, that those are inconsistent. If we approach them the right way with the right goals and the right priorities, I think we serve both of those goals. We create jobs, we grow Connecticut's economy, we understand and sensitive to the challenges of a better environment.
We have a little bit of time left, and I want to get to a few, maybe we can just get some quick answers to a few interesting questions here. Eversource has been cutting down large amounts of mature trees, changing the quality of neighborhoods and communities to protect aging infrastructure. What's your position on updating or maintaining our state's infrastructure while conserving trees?
I'll start with that. I mean, I love trees, so I'm for the trees. But
He says to the environmental group.
Exactly, the environment group. Let me tell you something else. I mean, I've been pulling wire and installing stuff for years, and it's just ridiculous to me that unlike Europe, unlike Britain, we still have most of this stuff aerial. We should be burying this stuff, especially in the densest areas. It unifies things, much lower maintenance going forward, and we can have our trees.
Can I just follow up that line? It's really, really, really expensive though. Like it's not cheap to bury all the infrastructure. How do you do that? How do you pay for that?
Look, you have to factor in the long-term maintenance costs, and every time that bridge goes down, you bring out the trucks, what that means when you shut things down. And remember, you have a couple of cable, you have telephone, you have a lot of guys on that wire now. They're all sharing that cost. It's a lot less expensive, believe me, I do it, than it used to be.
Who wants to jump in on trees next? Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, jump in on trees. I'll take liberties with all of our cities have kind of names. Ours is the Park City, believe it or not, because there's more public parkland and some of the most beautiful parks, including Beardsley Park and Seaside Park and others that have been designed by some world-renowned park designers. But to add to that, and I'm not taking credit for that, but I will tell you, understand, recognize the beauty of it and how important it is to quality of life, even in a densely populated urban center. And for young people, I created, I don't know the number I used in my first 11 years now, it was 14 parks, some of them smaller, some of them bigger. When we knocked down a building that was blight in the neighborhood, we could replace it and make it a park, and some of those sustained themselves for decades. Planted, got credited. And I think, for my public works department, planting thousands of trees, replacing esplanades, and I don't want to sound corny to you, but flowers and tulips that blossom and beautify neighborhoods that haven't kind of seen that type of commitment before. So I understand the dynamic. I know I'm really known as, and I should be, as mayor of a city, and growing up pretty much in that city. But I also spent 5 years growing up on a Christmas tree farm too. And I love it, I understand it, and any way that I can enhance that and recognize the beauty is, you kind of feel from the way I'm answering this, whether it's trees or flowers or parkland, open space, beautification, even in industrial cities, I think it should be a part of quality of life for all the residents, and I think they appreciate it.
I think that I shall never see a poem as long as a tree. The reality is, we went through the storms. Everybody went after Eversource for not being able to respond quickly. Clearly, in the near term, the trimmings have to occur if we're going to be able to withstand the storms that inevitably are going to continue to come. I just think I'll go back briefly to the comment about microgrids. I think it just underscores the fact that in the near term, we've got to have opportunities for distributed energy basis, so we're not solely dependent upon it. I think you start down that start that kind of a policy, you can have much more serious discussions about preserving the trees.
Rob, what do you think about this? Ned Lamont says bury the power lines, or do we trim the trees, cut down trees to protect the power lines we have?
Well, if you look at the cost of what it would take to actually move power lines, I'm sure even a simple move is in the tens upon tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Coming from, one thing that's been good about my life is after serving 6 years in the military, I did live in Seattle for many years myself, before coming back to the beloved home state. And that is, if you've been out there before, you know that it's an extremely green-minded area out there. Even though utility costs are low and the climate is very mild, they are the #1 market in the nation for high-efficiency energy costs, even though it cannot cost justify itself. But the one thing that they did out there that Weyerhaeuser does, the big lumber company, in that balance with nature. The state requires that for every tree that they cut down, I think they have to grow 2 equivalent to replace it. So that's a simple way of keeping the trees out there, but also being realistic about what the cost would be to try to reroute utility lines.
A number of you have mentioned this so far, and some of you have given some details, but in the couple minutes we have left, I'd like to get some more details around this, and Oscar, we'll start with you. When you mentioned putting jobs first, how can these jobs promote the environment? Be very specific about growing jobs and employment here in the state, but also protecting the environment.
Well, I think, John, they go hand in hand, in the sense that this has become a knowledge economy. That's a hackneyed phrase, but that is what we are living in. Connecticut has a tremendous advantage in that. Whether you're talking about moving manufacturing from 30 years ago into 40 years ago, when it was the so-called dirty area, into precision manufacturing, whether you're talking about artificial intelligence, which de facto is embedded in our insurance and financial services industry, whether you're talking about the health sector in places like smilo cancer or the genomic research being done at Jackson Lab, the jobs that are here, to me, fit into that area of an environmentally friendly area. We're not mining as you would out in the western part of the country or in other continents. So to me, this economy and the ability to grow the jobs here, the key thing we have to do is make sure that those who have not had the educational or training opportunities that are in our cities or that have dropped out of schools, that are coming back for second chances, coming out of incarceration, we have to make sure that we're building a bridge. I mean, part of the anger and the frustration that is out there is people feeling like they've been left behind. In this economy, we want to be sure that we're creating jobs for the 21st century, which means we've got to invest in workforce development in a very appropriate way. Complicated subject, but I think that concept of what we want in the state and what we already have is very compatible with an environmentally like strategy.
Ned Lamont, please go ahead next.
Well, first of all, don't get carried away on burying all the underground cables. It's a long-term prospect, but at least start with all the new construction we're doing and make that a mandate. In our more urban areas where it's much denser, you should be able to do that. I've tried to explain at the beginning of this that I've got to convince people every day that a green economy is also a strong economy. That energy efficiency means lower price power for somebody living in their home, also means good paying jobs for people going forward, as well as being great on the environment. I've got to make clear to folks that we can do both of these things at the same time. And I'd also just like to leave you with the other thought as I started. Remember, 4 candidates for governor up here, you're not getting any help out of Washington for the near term. I mean, they're rolling back energy efficiency. They're rolling back car efficiency. They are rolling back incentives for renewables. So it's going to take the states to act as a firewall and take the lead. Little Connecticut's going to have to work in association with our other states. We are going to work in association with our other states. We're going to continue to take the lead on this. You're going to want a governor who takes the lead on this. You're going to want an attorney general who fights back when they can. I see William Tong is here. He's an attorney general that would fight back. You want to make sure that Connecticut takes the lead, and that's what I will do. Thank you.
Joanna, how about you? Creating jobs that also
Sure, and we have, I think, a great example. Again, I'll look at our south end, where we have an eco-technology park that does just that. We have a recycling industry that takes tires and recycles them, and some of you know what they do with playgrounds. Mattress recycling, where legislation had to be passed so that there would be a fee in order to support this recycling industry for mattresses, which does predominantly hire second chance individuals. We have a variety of other biofuel, medical waste recycling facilities in this location. So there are existing now, and they may not be glamorous, but they fit the need of the concept of utilizing recycling, taking elements out of the waste stream, and located in this case in the city. I think we need to do more of that. I think we need to provide greater incentives statewide, collectively, on all fronts where appropriate, in order to encourage this as a part of our economic plan for economic growth and job creation. I think it's a way of the future. It's something that I'll keep in part of what I look to do, both here as mayor, but also as governor. So thanks so much.
One more time, I will speak specifically to the industry I know best, and that's the heating and air conditioning industry. Once again, it's the second biggest energy user out there next to your automobile. And one thing that we face here in Connecticut is that we have a very restrictive union licensing labor system out there. So for instance, when a employee or potential employee moves from out of state and has 30 years of experience, you cannot hire him here in Connecticut. He has to go through your apprenticeship program first. Now, this was not put in for consumer protection. This was put in to drive the cost of union labor in commercial shops up higher. It does not help residential shops or like commercial shops whatsoever. So we as a company, we understand, and I understand, with these tools that the state has created, Energize Connecticut, 1% financing, these amazing rebates are out there, the amazing energy efficiency that's out there. But these companies are handcuffed because we do not have enough employees. We could be installing way more of these systems out there right now if the labor market was opened up, and we could invite in employees from less paying states like Pennsylvania or from Florida for the season. So the other issue we have in the state right now also is, for too long, it's a big disservice, and we've been talking to all kids about four-year university. You need to go to college. When we say you need to go to college, we're really saying you need to go to four-year university. Well, in the United States, only 30% of U.S. adults have four-year university degrees, and that's about all we probably really need. We really need to push tech schools because there are so few kids going through tech schools these days. There's an amazing amount of high-paying jobs that are out there right now, not in the future. They're here right now. We don't have the bodies for it. So one job as governors, besides opening up the labor market, is also we need to promote these jobs. The kids that are out there that are just getting passed over because they're not, like most people, not everybody's four-year university degree, but everybody is college material of some sort. And if that's a tech school, there are tons of high-paying jobs out there right now. If we had somebody walk through the door tomorrow with a great attitude who was willing to learn, they would get hired.
I want to thank the panelists, the candidates for governor. To my left, Rod Hanscom, Joe Ganim, Neville Mond, that came together to make this evening possible. I want to thank you for caring about this, just this issue enough to come out on a Monday night in the heat to listen to people talk about it. It really gives me some hope because we do not talk about this issue very much. I've been covering state politics for a long time, and this is something we don't talk about near enough when we get into the course of this. So thank you all for your kind attention and for your wonderful questions. Thank you all so much.